the right strategy to not talk about an exit right now? Because the government wants to insist on the staying at home, social distancing. They don't want to muddy the waters. Or is it important to give people a sense of there is light at the end of the tunnel?
Well, I think the second of those. I mean, it's obvious that the lockdown is going to continue, and we're going to support the government in that, be very, very clear about that. But I do think the question, therefore, is what comes next. And there are really two reasons why I'm calling for this today. The first is trust. People are trusting the government. They are, broadly speaking, complying with the rules. That's a really good thing. And obviously, I thank the millions of people who are doing that. But they do need to see light at the end of the tunnel. I'm not asking the government for timings. Of course, I understand why they can't give us timings. But we do need the trust of the public as we go forward. There's a second reason that I think is really important, and that is planning. There are some criticisms of the planning of the government previously, and what we need to make sure is that the planning is going in now for the exit strategy. Because to take just one example, if part of the exit strategy is mass testing, community testing, and then tracing, and it may well be, I think it probably is, then that tells us that decisions about tests need to be taken now. And what we can't afford is can't afford a situation where in a few months we say, well, that's now the strategy.
Well, they should have been taken, Sir Keir, they should have been taken months ago.
And we already know that they were caught at the end of the queue for tests.
I mean, I know that you've been quite careful not to want to be revisionist about this at this stage. You believe that we're here and now, and I get that. But obviously, the same government that didn't act soon enough on testing, we now have to trust to make the right decisions now. The job of the opposition, I would argue, is that actually the last few months are very significant here in working out whether this government is making the right decisions and, crucially, whether the expert advice that they are relying on completely is right.
Well, I agree with that. And it's clear to me that mistakes have been made and things haven't been done as quickly as they should. I'm challenging the government today to make sure we don't make those mistakes again. I have been reluctant to call out the mistakes of the government at this stage in a sort of point scoring way, because I just don't think that's the right thing to do. But the point in saying, look, the planning wasn't as good as it should have been. We all know the testing has gone badly wrong. We know that the equipment hasn't been where it should be. Don't underestimate the task on the government. But if we're to avoid that sort of thing again, we do now need the exit strategy so that, as I say, when we get to the decision about what we're going to do, we make sure we have got the test if that's what we need.
You say that and I think viewers will completely accept and appreciate that you don't want to be point scoring. But what you do need to do is hold the government to account, don't you? For instance, we know Matt Hancock has promised 100,000 tests a day by the end of the month. The end of the month is 2 weeks' time. Yesterday, only, I think it was 14,000, 15,000 tests had been carried out.
Less than the day before.
What can you do without just point scoring, political point scoring? What can you actively do? How much information are you getting that can give you some agency when it comes to actually pressing the Health Secretary on delivering?
Well, the approach I've taken is that we've got to be constructive in the national interest, and that our aim, in the sense, is the same as the government's, which is save lives and protect the country. But we do have to challenge. We're under a duty to challenge and to point out mistakes or when things are too slow. And tests is an example of that. But the point in doing that is not to score points. The point in that is to say, look,
what I'm asking, Sir Keir Starmer, is what can you actually, what information are you getting that you can then actually change what's happening?
Just let me complete the approach and I'll come straight to that. But the point in the challenge, the point in the criticism for us is to point out a mistake or where something isn't happening quickly enough so that that mistake can be put right or speeded up. And test is an example of that, because what the government said is there would be 25,000 tests by mid-April, where we're there now. And as you rightly say, we're not at 25,000. And they've promised 100,000 by the end of the month. That's a very steep curve. So we point that out to challenge the government. On your point about what access we're having, I spoke to the Prime Minister on the day I was elected Labour leader and set out the approach I would take: constructive and support where we can, but challenge where we think there's a mistake. And I asked for access to the experts. As leader of the opposition, on a Privy Council basis, and he has set that up. So I have had a number of briefings, and I'm grateful for that, because that means that we're informed in the challenge that we make. But we must make that challenge. You're absolutely right.
So are you clear why we're not delivering tests at the rate that they promised?
Well, the government hasn't given an adequate explanation of that. It simply says we're going to get more tests in due course. So Matt Hancock said 100,000 by the end of the month. Well, we're halfway through the month and we're nowhere near that. There's now a suggestion there's going to be tests in social care. In addition to that, we need to push on the numbers. But it is important that we are only pushing to ensure that the right thing happens.
Was it right? Can I ask you on testing? One thing that's grating with people is that if you are rich, famous, or a politician and you need a test, you get one like that. And there was a classic example of this where Michael Gove, senior member of the government, was self-isolating because a member of his family, it turned out to be his daughter, was showing symptoms. And he went to Chris Whitty, the chief medical officer, and asked permission for her to be tested for COVID-19, which she was. They got the test result back very quickly. It was negative, and he was then able to go back to work. Now, that's a privilege which most NHS workers and most care workers right now would love to have, but aren't getting. Was it right that Michael Gove was able to do that?
Well, I agree with that. The priority should be those on the front line that are going in every day, whether it's to our hospitals or to our care homes. And I think we've overlooked those working in our care homes because they need to know. And obviously what we need there is a test administered to those that are showing symptoms so that they know whether they have got the virus or they haven't got the virus. I think everybody recognises that should be the priority. There are others, by the way, on the front line. Of course, there's prison officers and others in the front line who also need to know. So
just to clarify, was it wrong of Michael Gove to go to the chief medical officer?
I think the priority should be those on the front line who are...
So you think it was wrong of him to do that?
Well, the priority should be on those on the front line.
You've become leader of the Labour Party at the most extraordinary time imaginable.
Yes.
What's that like? And what's it been like for you?
It's very weird. So we started the 3-month campaign trying to see as many people as possible. We ended it at home trying to see nobody. And the speech that I made in acceptance, I had envisaged making to a sort of a packed conference room, turning from the membership of the Labour Party that we've been talking to for 3 months to talk to the country, which of course is crucially important. And I ended up doing that in my living room with just a camera and a microphone for company. I hadn't anticipated that as being the moment I'd do my acceptance speech, but they're the circumstances that we're in.
Well, they are amazing, Tom. We've got to let you go. But just finally, there's this, you've launched an investigation into a leaked internal report on anti-Semitism in the party and so on, and it's already ratcheting up once again the factions in the Labour Party, the Corbynites against the moderates and so on and so on. I've got to say, I don't have the time or patience for any of this. You know, you've made your position on anti-Semitism crystal clear. I was glad to see that. But rather than launch an investigation, would it not have been more prudent to have said, you know what, we're facing the biggest crisis of our lifetime here. I'm going to park all this until this is over, and then we will deal with it, rather than having this ridiculous feudal rowing going on, which is just taking a distraction away from everything else.
Well, there was a leaked report, and it is very serious, and I do think it's important to have that properly investigated. I absolutely get your point, and my priority is on the national interest, which is saving lives and protecting our country, because we are in not just a national crisis, a global crisis. But what I said in my election campaign to become leader of the Labour Party is we have to unite as a party and the factionalism must end. Stop asking the question which bit of the party you're in and start facing the future as one united force. And I'm determined that that is going to be a hallmark of my leadership, to pull people together, end the division. There's an old saying in politics, divided parties don't win elections. There's a reason for that, and that's because it's true. We need to focus on our historic purpose as the Labour Party, and that is to be in government, changing lives for the better. And that is my focus going forwards.